Wave 4 has been out for a few months now, and as you're probably all aware at this point, we got a new balance patch. If you didn't know, then for the Cliff Notes version, what Nintendo did alongside the release of Wave 4 was buff a lot of the underutilized characters, carts, and tires with increased speed and/or mini-turbo. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this led to a massive shakeup in the game, not only online, but in time trials as well. And I wanted to talk a bit about the current state of the game and provide some context around the apocalyptic title and thumbnail. Here's what I had to say about the changes when the patch first dropped. I don't think the game is dead or anything like that. Like, there's people that are just like, oh, they completely screwed the game up and the game is so bad now. And it's like, I don't think that's the case. I think the game is going to be just fine. And I think that the competitive scene will thrive and there will be a time trial scene. But I think it's really bad for... first of all, I think it's just it sets a bad precedent because, like, why would anybody want to spend a ton of time grinding time trials now when when you can just have your record shattered because Nintendo decided to release balance changes. And so it just doesn't make sense to me why they would want to have this balance patch, because there's always going to be a best combo. There's always going to be a meta build. If it's not Waluigi Wiggler anymore, it's gonna be something else that everybody's gonna use, and then everybody's gonna be whining in a year and a half about, like, why is everybody using Rosalina Teddy Buggy? God, I see this build everywhere, and it's like, yeah, because people want to win, and they're gonna use whatever the best build is. Now, while I may have been wrong about which combo would be the most popular, I was right about the broader point, which is that as of right now, we have the exact same situation that we had with Waluigi Wiggler, except with Yoshi Ink Striker as the new try-hard build. Now, I want to be clear that from my perspective, this is totally fine, since I think that when it comes to racing online, we tend to get the most enjoyment out of winning, and using the best setup maximizes your chances of that happening. But the point is that from the perspective of increasing build diversity online, the game is pretty much in the same state as it was before the patch, and this is really important to keep in mind when we consider the impact the patch has had on the time trial scene. Prior to the patch, world records were dominated by Baby Daisy and Waluigi, accounting for the vast majority of the game's 150cc world records. This might be surprising when you consider that there are intermediate characters such as Link and Yoshi, but the problem is that they gave up too much speed to compete with Waluigi on the less curvy tracks, and too much mini-turbo to compete with Baby Daisy on the more twisty, turny, snaky tracks. Now, Yoshi Bitty Buggy gains a massive speed boost over Baby Daisy Bitty Buggy for a very small mini-turbo trade-off. Similarly, Yoshi Teddy Buggy gains half a bar of mini-turbo over Waluigi Bitty Buggy by sacrificing just a quarter of a bar of ground speed, and Yoshi Ink Striker just gets a quarter bar of mini-turbo for free. The end result of all this is that Yoshi is now the go-to character on 57 of the pre-patched tracks, and while there is a bit more variety in the vehicles being used, this unfortunately doesn't translate to diversity in strategy. That's all well and good, but really when it comes down to it, the bigger issue is that changing the game in this way has really disincentivized a lot of time trialers and speedrunners from sinking more time into the game. For a bit of context, what blew up this channel was the fact that I got more into the game from speedrunning, which I only did so that I could beat my friends on 200cc. And by far the best way to improve at speedrunning is to time trial the individual tracks. Ultimately, this ended up being a way more enjoyable experience for me than racing online because speedruns are way less prone to the whims of RNG, and it was a nice way to keep the game fresh for me since it provided a reason to keep going back and redoing tracks that I'd already done multiple times over. Now, one thing that's important to point out is that the excitement that I get from lowering my personal best in a time trial or speedrun has little to do with the time itself and more about what it represents, which is achieving a certain level of mastery over the game. Prior to the patch, there was no difference between these two, but now, players can save around half a minute on a 48-track run without putting in any additional effort into the game. This might sound awesome, but paradoxically, it's made a lot of people in the community more reluctant to grind out runs. Based on my own opinion and some conversations that I've had with others in the community, there seems to be two main reasons for this. First, and this is just for me personally, some of the times that I set, while not the greatest in the world, are pretty optimized for my standards, and I just prefer to keep more optimized runs on the leaderboard than objectively jankier runs that were carried by stat changes. The second, and perhaps more pressing issue, is that now there's a massive amount of uncertainty about how the game is going to evolve for the rest of the year, and especially in regards to whether or not there's going to be any additional balance changes. Because here's the thing. Unlike the patch that removed fire hopping, which is something the developers never intended to be in the game at all, there was no actual reason for this balance patch other than because the developers decided they wanted people to use something else. I mean, let's be real, it's probably no coincidence that one of the characters that most benefited from these changes is Birdo, the first new character to come out since the game's release. And as for why this matters, well, it's because we have 5 more characters coming out over the next 2 waves, and it's not at all unlikely that the meta is going to change again as these characters get rolled out. And frankly, it just doesn't make sense to spend the effort to eke out every last thousandth of a second in a time trial or speedrun if more balance changes are coming out that can make those efforts feel wasted. I guess the point of all this is that I've always felt that people care way too much about what everyone else wants to use in playing online. Waluigi was never that much better than Yoshi or Metal Mario or Link, and I mean, I've got a whole video series dedicated to showing you that you can succeed online using absolutely jank builds. So if you wanted to use something that was off meta, you totally could have done that. But the thing is, people are always going to flock towards the most powerful builds because they want to win, and I've just never understood why that bothers people so much. Ultimately, patching the game to make Waluigi less popular, I guess just seems to be really misguided to me if the end results are that it puts the game in an objectively worse state with regard to build diversity, and that it's disincentivized a lot of the more hardcore fans from keeping up with the grind. But I want to close out on a more positive note here. I still absolutely love this game, and I'm going to continue to keep playing and doing my best to improve because I genuinely believe that few other games out there can deliver the kind of experience that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has to offer. And being a person who actually does like to play as Yoshi and Daisy, I am happy to see that two of my favorite characters are now the meta. I just want to make sure that I get my feelings out there because racing against others constitutes just one part of this amazing game, and I want to offer some perspective on the other parts in the hopes that in the future, Nintendo considers people who enjoy all facets of the game if they plan to roll out more updates like this. But how do you feel about the patch? Are you playing more, less, or about the same as before? And what other changes, if any, would you like to see? Sound off in the comment section, and I will catch you all in the next video.